Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event hosted by the Center for Geopolitics. My name is Donatas Kupčiūnas. I'm a Baltic Fellow at the Center, and it's my greatest pleasure to introduce to you today really the man, the legend, Tomas Venclova, who is a Lithuanian poet, writer, translator, and literary scholar. He's received many awards, including the Prize of the Two Nations, together with Czesław Miłosz, and the Person of Tolerance of the Year award from the Sugihara Foundation. He personally knew poets like Boris Pasternak, Anna Akhmatova, Joseph Brodsky, Czesław Miłosz was his patron. He's lived under 6 regimes. So first, independent Lithuania in the interwar period, then the first Soviet occupation, then Nazi occupation, then the second Soviet occupation. Then he lived in the States for some 40 years. And then he's now living again in newly independent Lithuania. Tomas Venclova was a dissident in the Lithuanian SSR in the 60s and 70s. In 1976, he co-founded the Lithuanian Helsinki Group, the first dissident human rights organization in the country. In 1977, he was forced to emigrate to the United States and was deprived of his Soviet citizenship. Since then, he's worked in top American universities and was a full professor in the Slavic languages and literatures in Yale until 2012. Of course, first and foremost, Tomas Venclova is a great poet. Just yesterday, he was in London talking poetry in the British Library. But today, we'll focus more on his dissident years, because we're, after all, the Center for Geopolitics. And we'll talk more about his dissident years in the Soviet Union. So, Professor, maybe let's first start from your early days in the Soviet Union. We know that you were born in Lithuania just before the Second World War. In particular, you had a prominent father who was also a poet and a known figure in Soviet Lithuania. Your father was awarded the Stalin Prize in 1952 for his literary work. Can you tell perhaps us more about his political views and where he was coming from?
Okay, thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me well? Yeah. You can. I am rather shy of my English, so excuse me. Maybe sometimes I will lose the necessary word, but let's hope. So, if we speak about my personal story, first of all, it is ancient history. It's more than 50 years ago. Lithuanian Helsinki Group was established exactly 50 years ago in 1976. In 1976. This year it has a 50-year anniversary, an anniversary celebration. And I also was rather prepared to tell something about the present situation in Eastern Europe. But let's start with that long, complicated, adventurous, maybe not necessarily boring, but adventurous story of Lithuanian descent. So, as you, of course, know, everybody of you know, the late Soviet Union consisted of 15 republics. And it was more variegated country than today's European Union. Every one of those 15 republics had its own identity. Ethnic identity, religious identity, economic identity, and so on and so on. There was Central Asia, mainly, if not exclusively Muslim. There were Caucasian republics, which were Christian. Georgia, Orthodox Sakartvelo, and Armenia were Christian. Azerbaijan was Muslim, and they remain Christian and Muslim also today. And everybody, among the republics had its own ambitions and its own goals. Although all that was, so to speak, deeply hidden, because the Soviet constitution sounded beautiful enough. It promoted, it proclaimed freedom of speech, freedom of organizations, freedom of separation from the Soviet Union. The Republic theoretically could separate from the Soviet Union, but if you started the procedure, you most likely would be simply shot as a traitor. The most rebellious among the republics were the Baltic republics, the Baltic states, since they got some, they experienced some taste of independence in the 20s and the 30s. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were free, although marginal and not very successful. I would say not extremely successful European countries, but they were European countries subscribing to Western values. So, and they were annexed in the year 1940. That was against the will, definitely against the will of majority of the population. There was also a minority of the population, but even in that minority, to which, by the way, my father belonged, even in that minority, most of the people were for independence and not against it. Nevertheless, the Soviets invaded those countries, established their own rule, and annexed those countries, arranging the sort of, a sort of pitiful spectacle, I would say, of fake elections, fake delegations coming to Moscow and so on, asking for joining the glorious and great Soviet Union. So that was a very unhappy situation. Then the Nazi occupation followed, which, there are people in Lithuania, I am strongly against that view, that the Nazi occupation was better. It was not. It was, in many respects, it was even worse. But we have today in Lithuania, we have some minority subscribing to the view that the collaboration with the Nazis was less negative than the collaboration with the Soviets. In my opinion, it is wrong. It was as wrong as the collaboration with the Soviets, in some respects even worse. Then the Soviets came again. Then, I was born and brought up in a literary milieu. My father, my uncle, my grandfather, my great uncle, all they were writers. And all they were rather leftists. I preserved part of the leftist worldview, but which is an anti-communist worldview, since the communism, in my opinion, has nothing in common with the original and authentic left. Now, but I was brought up in the Soviet school. I was an exception because most of my classmates were anti-Soviet, but it was extremely dangerous, and everybody was silent. They spoke a bit about the political situation, but in very, very cautious terms, I would say. And I was pro-Soviet. I was as pro-Soviet as my father until the age of 18 to 19. Then first of all, a person looks around and sees that the things are not going the way which is officially proclaimed. The things are going in a very different and very unpleasant way. The Soviet Union was extremely two-faced, so to speak. Then I think that Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin made one great mistake. He never banned the world literature. He banned, more or less, he banned Dostoevsky, but he did not ban Tolstoy or Pushkin. He banned Proust or Joyce, but he did not ban Shakespeare, or for that matter, George Gordon Byron. No, they were available in the libraries and the bookshops and the translations, also in the original. If anybody knew Western languages or Russian language, so they could influence people. And all that great world literature is anti-totalitarian. It is permeated by anti-totalitarian spirit. So my father had a big personal library. I read everything in my young years and was influenced by those writers I just mentioned. Later I also found out also Dostoevsky, also Proust and so on, but that was later. They were either banned altogether or semi-banned, so to speak. Available, but not exactly available. Now, but it influenced me definitely. Then when Stalin was unmasked by Khrushchev, I understood that something definitely should be changed in that country and in the satellite countries, such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and so on. Something has to be changed. The Poles started to change it. Well, I was 18 years old. I decided, well, it's very romantic, very positive, very good. They are doing the correct work, changing the system for better. Then the Hungarians started to do it. Oh, Hungarians are very good guys, and so on. Then the Hungarians were crushed in a very terrible, very, I would say, just horrible way. Everybody saw it. Then, and the Polish Revolution was crushed also, but only in half. The Polish literatures remained interesting enough, and it was available. You can buy Polish magazines, Polish literature, Polish writers in bookshops. Well, there was one bookshop in the Lithuanian capital, Vilnius, but it was good enough. You could not buy Czesław Miłosz, for example, because he was an emigrate. But Gombrowicz was also an emigrant, and he was more or less available. He was reprinted in the communist Poland. Miłosz was never reprinted and strictly banned, but we managed to get some idea of Miłosz as well. Then, Poland and Polish literature, Polish press which was liberal enough in comparison with the Soviet press. So be it a Soviet Lithuanian or Soviet Russian press. Polish was liberal enough. That was a great influence on my generation, a great influence. Then, but when the Hungarian uprising was crushed in a very cruel and very direct way, that was for me, well, the Buddhists speak about the moment of enlightenment, when a young Buddhist understands everything. The teacher probably gives him a blow with a bamboo, and then the enlightenment comes. He understood, he or she maybe understands what nirvana is, what karma is, what Buddha was, who Buddha was, and so on and so on. So for me, such moment of enlightenment was the 56th year, the November 4th, when the Hungarian Revolution was crushed. From that time on, I understood that this system cannot be corrected. It should be destroyed. But how? It looks very mighty. It looks absolutely dominating. It has some connections with the West, and not everybody in the West is against it. So it's a very difficult thing. I decided, and I would say all my generation decided, this is a very long-term goal. Our children will probably never live to see the destruction of the Soviet system. Our grandchildren may be. As for us, no, we cannot. We cannot see it. We will never see it. But as decent people, as honest people, we should do something for, well, very slow change. The first rule was, don't lie. Don't repeat official lies. Try to be silent in this, in this respect. Never join the Communist Party. Well, it is, it would be dishonest to join the Communist Party, which killed at least several millions, probably dozens of millions of people. One cannot do it. So not everybody in Lithuania agreed with us, but in my generation I found people who thought similarly to myself. So, and then the Soviet Union developed and changed in the process of that development, and in the Khrushchev period and in the Brezhnev period, there was some slow, slight, imperceptible, but nevertheless existing change. There were groups of similarly thinking people, the so-called dissident groups. I had some friends, not only in Lithuania, but in Moscow, in Poland, in Latvia, in Estonia, in Ukraine, in Georgia or Sakartvelo, as they prefer to call the country. So there were groups which were discussing, in secret, discussing the fate of the Soviet system and the ways of changing it and finally of destroying it. There were such groups. Lithuania was very active in that, probably the most active among the republics. We had, for example, 14 underground magazines, 14. All of them under pseudonyms. That was, of course, a conspiracy matter, but nevertheless a very real phenomenon. There were groups discussing problems among themselves. But in Lithuania, there were only two goals of those groups. The first and obvious goal was, well, Lithuania must be independent and non-communist. Independent, and some even say even communist but independent. To that I never agreed. That I said this is contradictio in adjecto, but still there were many people, especially among the intelligentsia. Well, we can be communist, but without the Russian yoke. So there was this idea of Russian yoke. Sometimes well, maybe it's a bit incorrect to say it in England, but it remains one of Irish situation. Ireland was as rebellious as Lithuania, rebellious not against the Russian, the Moscow rule, but against the London rule. And the Dublin rule, which was the continuation of London's rule. So, they even, well, there was, as everybody knows, there was a armed rebellion in Ireland, well, several armed rebellions in Ireland, the same in Lithuania. There was a strong partisan movement in the 40s, but finally it was crushed. Then there were those underground groups. So, but they were interested only in preserving the ethnic identity of Lithuanians, and in that they were pretty successful. Lithuanians preserved their ethnic identity better than, for example, Irish people. The Irish people lost their language, as everybody knows. The Gaelic is, well, dying out or almost died out. Lithuanian was also dying out in the 19th century, but after the 19th century, we managed to revive it. We managed to establish press in the Lithuanian language. That was difficult. It's a long story and a very difficult story, but we managed to do it. And today, 3 million of people, that means the definite majority of people in Lithuania, speaks Lithuanian language as the first language. There are dozens of universities in Lithuanian language. There are hundreds of magazines and thousands of books in Lithuanian language. There are very good theaters in Lithuanian language, and radio and TV and internet and everything. We have everything. When I visited Ireland, I did it several times in my life, I was told by many Irish people that they are envious of the Lithuanian success. The Irish people did not have such success. Well, they were successful in establishing their independence, but not in establishing their language. Then, well, the ethnic survival, the first goal. The second goal, preserving of the Catholic faith. As Irish people, we are also Catholics. Most of Lithuanians are Catholics. There are some Calvinists, there are some Lutherans, there are some Russian Orthodoxes, there are some Jewish people, now very small number of them, but they do exist. Some Muslims, but more than 80% of population in Lithuania is Catholic. Well, more Catholic or less Catholic, but Catholic, or subscribing to the Catholic heritage, I would say. So the other idea was preserving of the Catholic heritage, which was very difficult because the Soviets closed many churches, persecuted the priests, and what is worse, not only persecuted, but took some priests to their side. There were more than one priest who became a KGB agent, for example, but not everybody. The best and the biggest of the underground magazines was called the Chronicle of Lithuanian Catholic Church. In the beginning, such a chronicle was invented by Russians, by my friend Natasha Gorbanevskaya, by Alexander Ginsburg, by several other Moscow dissidents. They printed the underground newspaper, the so-called the Chronicle of the Current Events. And then the Lithuanian Catholics who had some access to that underground chronicle, they decided to arrange their own Catholic chronicle, which was successfully arranged. It leaked to the West. It was read by popes, including especially John Paul II, who even knew some Lithuanian language. Well, that's a big deal, because Lithuanian is one of the more difficult languages in Europe. To tell you something funny, a funny story, I had a student from New York who knew 50 languages and decided to take a class in Lithuanian with my humble person. He did. In 2 semesters, he started to write beautiful letters in Lithuanian to me and speak Lithuanian almost as well as myself. Then I asked him, we Lithuanians are very proud of our language for several reasons. It is rich, it is archaic, it is phonetically interesting, grammatically interesting, and so on and so on. But we are especially proud of the fact that it is extremely difficult. So tell me, you know 50 languages. Is Lithuanian difficult or not? He answered, well, moderately. It's less difficult than Sanskrit. It's more difficult than Latin or ancient Greek. But that's all that is peanuts. If you look for a difficult language, it is Navajo language of the Indian tribe in the United States, Navajo. But that's a difficult language. But in any case, I continue that John Paul II knew some of Lithuanian language. I even had an audience with him, well, a very short one, but I addressed him in Polish and he answered me in Lithuanian. So 2 goals of the Lithuanian underground movement. And now we decided to make one more step under some influence of Moscow dissidents, by the way. Not only of Moscow dissidents, of Polish dissidents, such as Adam Michnik, or Leszek Kolakowski, or maybe Czesław Miłosz himself, and so on. So to do one step, we are interested not only in the problems of ethnic Lithuanian heritage and of Catholic Lithuanian heritage, but of human rights as such. This is I would say that would be one step higher or one step further. Of course, we are interested in Lithuanian rights and in Catholic rights, but we are interested in the rights of everybody, not only ethnic Lithuanians, but also Poles, also Jews, also Russians, by the way, also Germans, and so on. We are interested in the human rights of Catholics, but also of Calvinists, of Lutherans, of Buddhists, of Muslims, of Jewish people, of Judaists, and so on. So, but now we should probably make a short, I would probably make a short break because I am speaking, and that's...
Thank you, Professor. We've covered a lot of ground
Yes.
already. Maybe a few more questions from me, and then we can...
But about the Helsinki Group.
Yes, but maybe before that. So when was the first time you got in trouble with the authorities, and what did you do, and what did they do to you?
The first time I got into trouble with the authorities was probably when I visited a cemetery in Vilnius, together with many people. And that was the All Saints' Day. When I am not an ardent Catholic. I am a Catholic, I am a baptized Catholic, but not very much a practicing Catholic. But I visited the cemetery during the All Saints' Day and brought several candles to the to the graves of some Lithuanian public figures, including my own uncle, by the way. Then all the people who did it were persecuted. Some of them were thrown out of the university and taken into the Soviet army. Some, well, probably one or two were even arrested. But as for myself, I was still a member of the Komsomol, of the Communist Youth Organization at that time. I was, well, 18, that was in 56, well, 19. And I was given a special, well, reprimand, how to say it, the reprimand by the Communist Youth authorities that if such a behavior repeats, I will be thrown out of the Komsomol, which means also throwing out of the university. That was probably the first time. But I also was active as a literary personality. I wrote poems. I tried to publish them without much success, although many of my friends thought that the poems are not very bad. But they were never published because I had an allergy towards the Soviet ideological lingo. And I also translated poetry into Lithuanian, including banned or semi-banned poets. I translated Tomas Venclova, for example, including The Wasteland, into Lithuanian. It was also translated by one Lithuanian emigrate, active in the United States. I saw his translation a year or more after my own translation was done, and looked and tried to compare them. Only one line coincided, only one line. But his translation was good enough, and I hope that mine was not very bad as well, but they were different. Then I translated Pasternak, and Pasternak, in the beginning, you know, you may remember the story. He wrote a novel, not quite a Soviet novel, and critical towards the Soviet ideologically. Dr. Zhivago, later made into a well-known commercial movie, and he got a Nobel Prize. And several of us wrote a letter to Pasternak. It was given to him secretly, but we congratulated him. But I tried also to translate Pasternak and even succeeded in publishing some of his poetry in Lithuanian language. Pasternak, also Akhmatova, also Mandelstam, Russian dissident poets, also such Western poets as, let us say, Saint-Jean Perse, a Nobel Prize winner, a French poet, and Dylan Thomas, if you want, W.H. Auden, and so on. So the authorities felt that I am doing some strange work, which is to say, to tell it directly, it is an anti-Soviet work. It is trying to change the Soviet dictionary, trying to change the Soviet language by promoting those strange poets, and so on and so on. So, and finally, well, what happened, my colleague just told me that I was forced to emigrate. That was not exactly this way. After my father died. I was not an open dissident until my father's death, because my father had serious health trouble, and I did not want to become the cause of his premature death. No. I was cautious enough until my father was alive. I became less cautious after his death. He died in 1971. And then my work they did not publish my work anymore. Neither of my translations. I even cannot survive as a translator. The best way to work in the Soviet Union without promoting the ideological lingo was translating. You could translate Shakespeare, why not? But Shakespeare is far away from the Soviet ideological lingo. You can translate, well, Pushkin, but Pushkin is also far away from the Soviet ideological lingo. So you don't go against your own conscience doing the translator's job. And you can survive this by this work, because it was relatively well paid in the Soviet Union. Relatively well paid, better than in the West. Now, I survived. I survived for many years as a translator. A strange translator, and maybe a wrong translator, translating the wrong literature, but still I could survive. After my father's death, they ceased publishing even my translations. Sometimes I was invited to the university to give a class as an exception. Once in several semesters, but it was a class. It was paid very badly, by the way. 3 rubles for a lesson. 3 rubles for a lecture. Well, that means more or less, 3 pounds for a lecture. That's not very much, I would say. Then I understood that the authorities decided to bring me back to the ranks of the Soviet writers. If you translate the right persons, like, let us say, Louis Aragon, or Howard Fast, or something else, then yes, then we will allow you to survive, but to a large degree this is ideological lingo. But you can teach in the university, and we will pay you better not 3 rubles for the lecture, but let us say 150 rubles for a month. Maybe, but you should do the right thing. And I understood that even I survive. Yes, either I don't survive, or I must change my views and my behavior. Then I wrote an open letter to the Soviet authorities, to the Central Committee of Lithuanian Communist Party. There were no other parties, of course, in Lithuania, writing that I don't believe in the communist ideology. Ideology. I don't believe into it. I considered it wrong to a large degree. Well, not everything in the communist ideology is wrong. I believe even today, but most of things are definitely wrong. So I wrote that. That was something incredible. Nobody never could tell something similar. That was written in my open letter. But nevertheless, I am inimical to your ideology, and that was never a secret to anyone of you. I was able to survive as a cultural worker. Now I cannot. In this case, the best idea for me would be emigrating. I ask you, in accordance with the Declaration of the Human Rights and in accordance with the Soviet law, to allow me to go to the West and to try to make my living there. That was also something absolutely incredible. Some people were allowed at that time to go out of the Soviet Union, but they were Jewish. That was easier for them because they had Israel. They had their own country. And after a long struggle, there was a very prolonged and difficult struggle of the Jewish people. The authorities finally decided, well, some of them can go, some of them. Losing the Soviet citizenship, losing all the property in the Soviet Union, paying just very big sum of money, and so on, taking with themselves only the small part of their property. But some of them, if they don't know the state secrets, they can go to the Israel. Okay. So, also to take you something funnier, one Jewish academician, a physicist, came to the Soviet office asking for the permission to go to Israel, and he said, "Why don't you let me go?" Well, he was answered, it's very simple. You know the state secrets. What state secrets? We are behind the United States for 20 years, probably more. What secrets can be? This is our state secret, he was answered. So some Jewish academicians, and especially connected with the army, they had to wait sometimes for 10 or more years, but not everybody. But I was not Jewish. I have, unfortunately, I have not a drop of Jewish blood. So my letter was something incredible. It was a letter written by a totally crazy person. It could end in imprisonment, but rather in a psychiatric hospital. Such things happened, by the way. One Russian philologist, specialist Italian language and literature, before me wrote such a letter, saying that I love Italy, I want to go to Italy, please let me go. He was put in the psychiatric hospital. He spent 5 or 6 years there. But finally he was let to go to Italy, finally, in the final account. And I think he still lives in Italy. He did not make any career in the West, but still he lives in his beloved Italy, and thank God. So this letter, but the letter was the so-called open letter. Open letter, that means that I decided that it should leak to the West. I myself was not connected with the Chronicle of the Catholic Church, with the underground magazine, not connected with it. But I knew some people some of them my friends, whom I suspected that they have some connection to that Chronicle of the Catholic Church. To one of those people I gave my open letter, saying not a word, just giving him to read it. He read it, put it into his pocket, and we parted. That's all. In a half a year, it appeared in the Chronicle of Lithuanian Catholic Church, and since it leaked to the West, it became well known in the West. At that time, some of my friends, and one of my friends was Joseph Brodsky, future Nobel Prize winner and a great Russian poet. He was my friend. He came to Vilnius, and we made friends at that time. But he was living already in the West. Well, he was Jewish. Then Miłosz, Brodsky, and even Arthur Miller, the husband of Marilyn Monroe, they became working on my behalf, writing in the Western press. Well, a person wants to emigrate, why you don't let him? In the West, it is the simplest thing imaginable. If you live in the United States, but you want to live in Italy or France, after some very uncomplicated bureaucratic procedures, you can perfectly do it, but not in the Soviet Union. It's strictly forbidden because the Soviet Union is the best country in the world, and trying to leave the best country, first of all, it is treason, and secondly, it's a crazy enterprise. Who may want to leave the best country in the world? So, but how I knew that Arthur Miller helped me? That was very simple. One of his plays was staged by the Vilnius Theatre in Lithuanian translation, and it was very successful. Suddenly, it was taken off stage without any explanation. Although it's still, the performances were still sold out. Nevertheless, it was taken out of stage. I was probably the only one person who understood that Arthur Miller most likely said something on my behalf. Later, many years later, I met Arthur Miller and asked him, did you spoke on my behalf? Oh, yes, he said. Joseph Brodsky came to me, asked me, and I signed some petition, please let that crazy Venclova go. Such things. But then a strange thing happened. One of the Russian dissidents, whose name was Kovalyov, was tried in Vilnius. Why in Vilnius? Why not in Moscow? Because the Western journalists were never allowed to go to Vilnius. so the trial could go without unnecessary, what? Yes, yes, without unnecessary attitude by Western journalists. So Kovalyov was tried in Vilnius. He helped to transmit to the West the Chronicle of Lithuanian Catholic Church, one of the people who did it. Another one was Lyudmila Alexeyeva. There were several of such people. All that was done in secret, but still they managed to find out who is doing it, and Kovalyov was tried. To his trial, Sakharov came. Sakharov was, as most of you probably know, Sakharov was one of the greatest physicists in the world, the father of Soviet hydrogenic weapons, who became a dissident. And Kovalyov was his friend. Sakharov went to Vilnius. At the very moment of Kovalyov's trial, he got a Nobel Peace Prize. And so that created a big stir in the West. That was something. But he was never allowed into the building where the trial of his friend was taking place. That helped the public relation stir. Yes, even helped it. And so Sakharov he met some Lithuanian dissidents and told them, we in Moscow are thinking about an interesting idea. Now the Soviet Union signed the Helsinki Accords, promising freer movement between the Soviet Union and the West, promising more freedoms in the Soviet Union, and so on and so on. It has no intent to do it, but we can make the face that, well, we believe you, the Soviet authorities, you should do it. If you don't do it, it's a violation of the Helsinki Accords. And we try to attract the attention of the Western media to that fact, that the Soviet Union is violating the Helsinki Accords. We write a document under our own names, without any pseudonyms, without any conspiracy, signed document that in such and such case, the Soviet Union violated the Helsinki Agreement, and send it, this document, to all the governments which signed the Helsinki Agreement, including the Soviet government. That's very important. So we are doing that in Moscow. I have heard, said Sakharov, that Ukrainians and Georgians also think about it. How about you Lithuanians? And there were at least two persons who became interested in that. One of them was Viktoras Petkus. Viktoras Petkus was a dissident of many, many years. He spent at least 10 years already in the Soviet prison. He was connected with the partisan movement in the 40s. He had some marginal job in Vilnius, but everybody knew that this person is a very dedicated dissident, Petkus. He said, well, Andrei Dmitrievich, that Sakharov's patronymic, your idea looks interesting, we will think about it. The second one was Eitan Finkelstein, who was a Jewish activist, one of those people who knew state secrets and was not allowed to go to Israel, although he was a Zionist and he wanted to go to Israel. So, and strangely enough, they made a tandem, a Catholic and an ethnic Lithuanian Petkus, and a Judaist, Zionist, and Jewish activist Finkelstein. Strangely enough, they made it a tandem. Then they came to my flat. I never met them before, but they came to my flat and said, well, dear Tomas Venclova, we should like to talk with you. We went out to the place where there could be no eavesdropping, and well, I said, well, what the problem, my friends? They said, well, now you became a celebrity because, well, Brodsky and Miłosz and Arthur Miller, they are talking on your behalf, and we are organizing a Lithuanian Helsinki Group. Would you be so kind to join us? We need known names, and your name became known. I said, well, my friends, it's a very good idea. It's the best way to try to slightly change the Soviet ways of behavior, which I tried to do my entire life, my entire conscious life. But I wrote a letter asking for the right to emigrate. If I join your group, it's quite possible that they will throw me out, and you will remain. You will remain in Lithuania. I would look like a deserter, as a well, Bailey's English. Coward. Yes,
Coward.
Coward, yes, coward. As a coward, so I doubt I should join the group, although I love the idea. Then Petkus said to me, well, don't believe they will throw you out. They will imprison everybody, including you. And that could be 10 to 15 years. This is a very serious matter. So, well, if you are afraid, well, you are a free person. You can join or not. We can give you a book about the Soviet prison system. Write it and, read it. I always mixed reading and writing. I don't know why. Read it, and then you will tell us. And have in mind, if they throw you out, which is very, very, very improbable, you can be our representative abroad. And we need such a representative. Why not? Then I looked through the book about the Soviet prison system. I trembled for 3 nights. Then I came and said, well, now I understand. If I don't join you, I will be a coward and a deserter. So I don't want it, so I join you. So we arranged this Helsinki group. They asked me, we should find several more people. We have one Catholic priest, okay, but we need a leftist. I said, well, I think I know a leftist. I knew a lady, an elderly lady, who was a leftist during the period of the independent Lithuania. She was even imprisoned at that time for a short period. Then she was not a communist, but she was a socialist revolutionary, the so-called SR, socialist revolutionary. Then, when the Soviet occupation came, she tried to continue her activities, her social revolutionary activities, helping people and so on, and was arrested and got 10 years term. She spent 10 years in Siberia, came back, and lived as a marginal person. I knew her. My father also knew her. To tell the truth, they were even friends with my father. I said I will try to include that lady in our group. I went to the city he lived in and told her also outside of the apartment, somewhere where there was lesser possibility of eavesdropping. Well, we are arranging Lithuanian Helsinki Group with such and such goals. Would you consider joining it? She said, well, I dreamed about it my entire life. Of course I will. So, and there were five persons belonging to that group. A leftist, well, she was a poetess, a minor poetess, but still a poetess, a journalist, former political prisoner, a leftist, then a Catholic priest. Then Petkus was also a Catholic, not a priest, but a Catholic, and a Catholic activist. Then Eitan Finkelstein, who was a Jewish activist. And then my humble person, who was, well, just an intellectual of a bit leftist worldview, but definitely anti-Soviet. So, and we decided that it looks like an embryo of a future Lithuanian parliament. We have Catholics, we have leftists, we have Democrats, yes, if you want, or Republicans, if you want. We have representative of the ethnic minorities, and so on and so on. So, well, that looks okay. So, and then we went to Moscow, also because the Western journalists cannot come to Vilnius, and made contacts with the Moscow Helsinki Group. One of the persons who belonged to the Moscow Helsinki Group was Anatoly Sharansky. You may have heard about Anatoly Sharansky. He was a Jewish activist who was arrested. First, he was threatened by the death penalty, but then the Soviet authorities gave him 15 years. They let him out after 10 years, and he became, in Israel, he became a public figure, a minister, and so on. Sharansky was a member of the Moscow Helsinki Group, and he spoke the best English among us all. So we prepared a sort of manifesto of Lithuanian Helsinki Group in Lithuanian. We translated it into Russian. The problem was to find a typewriter in Moscow with a Latin typescript. We found it. There was a dissident later he died in West Germany, whose name was Skopelev. He was a translator from German language, and he had a Latin typewriter. So we wrote down this Lithuanian manifesto with all the signatures, presented to the Western journalists, explained to them several of the human rights cases in Lithuania, and Sharansky was a translator into English. He also translated our manifesto into English. We went to Moscow, only three of us, Petkus, Finkelstein, and myself. The older persons, the leftist poet and the Catholic priest, they remained, but they allowed us to use their signatures. But they remained in Lithuania. We went by 3 different trains, thinking that if somebody is arrested, maybe 2 others will remain. But nobody was arrested. We all, the Soviet authorities were extremely astonished by this Helsinki movement, and for some time they did not know what they should do with it. And the Helsinki movement had their press conferences without much trouble from the Soviets for some time. for some time. So we had this press conference in Moscow, and then we came back to Vilnius. When I came back to Vilnius, my mother told me, "Dear Thomas, you are invited to the Ministry of Internal Affairs." The Minister of Internal Affairs, that is the police, not the secret police, but the regular police. The secret police is called KGB, and the MVD is the regular police. Then you are invited to MVD building. I went to the MVD building. They said me, "You have," sorry, but I am approaching the end of my story, then we probably will continue with some questions. And they asked me, "Well, you have an invitation to present a class at the University of Berkeley in California. Why don't you go?" I said, "Well, I have no foreign passport." The Soviet citizen had to have a foreign passport for leaving the country. Neither I have a visa. Not only the American visa, but also the Soviet exit visa. You needed such things at that time. They said, "We will arrange you a passport and an exit visa, but please go." I said, "Well, I must talk to my relatives and to my friends." They said, we give you two weeks for that. Is it enough? I said, "Well, maybe enough." I told it to my mother, but I also had a little daughter. My daughter was 3 years old at that time. Neither my wife of that period, later we divorced, but that was much later, neither my neither my daughter, at that time they did not want to leave the Soviet Union, and my mother also did not want to leave the Soviet Union. But my mother said, "I will make no trouble for you. I think that it's better to die from hunger in the United States than to die from hunger in Siberia. So go, I let you go." The wife said more or less the same. Then I came to the friends, that means to the Helsinki Group. They said, "Oh, that's perfect. You will be our representative in the West. We give you a special paper. Be very cautious with it. But you should approach the Lithuanian emigrate circles, and not only Lithuanian emigrate circles, also the Western governments, and to tell them about the situation in Lithuania when you are out." All the Helsinki Group gave me a permission to go. They were happy. They were happy. Later, what happened later, when I was already in the West, Petkus was arrested, and he got 15 years term. He was put in the one prison cell with Anatoly Sharansky. So now, well, there is a rule that if you put two lovers into one prison cell, in half a year they become mortal enemies. They become mortal enemies. So the Soviet authorities thought that, well, Sharansky is Jewish, Petkus is Lithuanian. Lithuanian are generally anti-Semites. Petkus is Catholic. Sharansky is Judaist. They will simply kill each other in that cell. But when they came to the cell, what happened? Petkus said to Sharansky, "Well, could you give me some lectures about Talmudic wisdom?" Then Sharansky said, "With pleasure, but please give me some idea of the Catholic dogma. I would like to know about it." And for several several months they explained each other Catholic dogma and Talmudic wisdom and became very close friends. Then, well, but I was let out. One of my friends told me, well, you think you will go out? Well, this is a stupid daydream. The plane will make a circle around Vilnius and then to land in the courtyard of the psychiatric hospital, and that will be everything. Of course, that was a joke. I understood that was a joke, but still I was a bit afraid until I reached Paris. But I reached Paris. I immediately made a statement for the Western media that I am a member of a Lithuanian Helsinki Group and I have no intent to ask for a political asylum. That was also something extremely unusual. Everybody who managed to get out of the Soviet Union and thought about going to the West immediately asked for the political asylum. I said I have no intent because I don't want to seize the connection between myself and Helsinki Group. If necessary, I will come back. I will come back and work together with my Helsinki friends. That was unusual. Then I was invited by the Congress of the United States to present a talk about the situation in Lithuania. I presented a talk in Lithuanian with the help of a translator in the Congressional Committee. It was included in the congressional records, and that was something also very, very unusual for the Soviet Union and for Lithuania. I still was technically a Soviet citizen. Now, finally, after half of a year, they stripped me of my Soviet citizenship. They confiscated my Soviet passport. Only then I was, in a sense, forced to ask for a political asylum because I could not come back. And the asylum was granted, and in due course I became an American citizen, which I still am, but I also have a Lithuanian citizenship, which is more important for me for the simple reason. For Lithuanian affairs are more important for me than American affairs. I not always vote in the United States, but I always vote in Lithuania, where it can make some difference. But I voted for Obama for a simple reason. I strongly believe that it is a historical moment, that a person of an African heritage should be elected the President of the United States, just like a woman should be elected. The woman still was not elected, but Obama was. I voted for Obama. I voted against Donald Trump. If necessary, I can explain why. But probably even not necessary. Now, but in Lithuania, I always vote. So I was lucky because I got an academic work in the United States, thanks to the help of Brodsky and Miłosz, who wrote some recommendations for myself, and was invited to teach at Yale, just for a temporary assignment. Just got a temporary assignment, just a sort of a trial. But the students were rather happy. They asked the students, what do you think about Tomas Venclova? The students were rather happy, and my colleagues were also rather happy. And I finally got a tenure at Yale, well, which was totally unexpected. So now I told you my entire biography, well, not entire biography, but the main part of my biography, which is probably, well, in Lithuanian we say it pamokoma. How would you say it in English?
Instructive.
Yes, instructive probably. Instructive, yes. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor. We've covered quite a bit of ground. Let's open up the floor for questions now. Who'd like to shoot first? And maybe then afterwards we'll ask you to read a poem of yours, if you don't mind. Excellent. Yes.
Thank you so much for your talk. It's been fascinating. I'm writing my PhD dissertation on how the UK responded to the Helsinki Accords in the 1970s and 1980s, and then looking at how they developed the agreements in the 1990s, and to listen to someone who is actually advocating for its implementation in the Soviet Union is really amazing. And I wanted to ask you about what you think the changes are in the Soviet Union after the agreement of the Helsinki Accords. Obviously, you have all of these Helsinki monitoring groups springing up, and at first the Soviet authorities don't seem to know what to do, as you said, and some would argue that the USSR actually became much more repressive in the late 1970s and 1980s, but because dissidents were increasingly seen as representatives of Western interests, because the West are supporting the Helsinki Accords. So my question is, in short, is what do you think happens to the Soviet Union? How does it change after the Helsinki Accords as a result of that agreement?
Thank you.
Well, it's a good question. Most of the Lithuanian intellectuals were against the Helsinki Accords for three reasons. Against the Helsinki Group, to be precise, for three reasons. First of all, they said, well, the Helsinki Accords accept the existing borders in Europe. That means they put Lithuania, they make Lithuania annexed to the Soviet Union for all times. Of course, no decent Lithuanian can agree to that. The first thing. Well, my answer is the Helsinki Accord said that the borders cannot be changed in armed way, by arms, which Putin does in Ukraine. But nothing was said about changing of the borders in a peaceful way. And finally, it was done in a peaceful way. Lithuania separated from the Soviet Union relatively very peacefully. 13 persons or 14 persons perished, but we were afraid that many hundreds, thousands, probably hundreds of thousands people may perish, but that, thank God, never happened. Then the second thing, that you the Helsinki Group people are not the Lithuanian dissidents. You are Soviet dissidents. Well, in my opinion, Lithuania could not, in any case, could not become liberated itself, alone. Only in connection with all the Eastern Europe, including Russia. That was difficult. But in Gorbachev period, it became possible, and Russian people generally did not support any terror towards Lithuania. Later that changed. In Putin period it changed, but there was a moment, and only in connection with Poles, with Latvians, with Estonians, with Georgians, with Ukrainians, and Russians themselves. Only this way we could become liberated. Now some of Lithuanian politicians tried to make an impression that Lithuania liberated absolutely by itself. Our leaders were as wise and as strong that they won Lithuanian independence. No, that could not happen. Well, they did. They job, and that was a very good job, definitely. But that could not happen without Gorbachev, and especially without Sakharov. It could not, absolutely. That could not happen without changes in Poland. That could not happen without the disappearance of the Berlin Wall. And the third reproach by the Lithuanian intelligentsia was, you are working in the open. That means you are going to Siberia, as simple as that. Well, my opinion was that, well, first of all, not necessarily. Work in the open, well, of course, some people were repressed. Petkus got his 15 years. Even Sakharov was exiled to a city of Nizhny Novgorod. But the authorities generally were cautious because at that particular time, the Western public opinion made some impression on the Soviet authorities. Now it does not anymore, and that's a big pity and yes, a big misfortune. I sometimes say that this is, according to Karl Marx, it is an irony of history. We tried to destroy the Soviet Union in a legalistic way, and we succeeded, because the Soviet Union in Gorbachev times were finally destroyed in the legalistic way. Yes, by strictly legal way. No, but the Soviet leaders were old and cautious people. Now they were. Now there is a new generation, educated by the KGB, much more aggressive, much more dangerous. This is irony of history. We helped Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, also I think also Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan to become liberated, also Ukraine, but not Russia. Well, why it happened, yes, it is a long story. I thought I will talk about that, but we maybe don't have any more of time. But this rejecting of this double thing, as Orwell said, the rejecting of that double speak, the double speech was very important psychologically, ideologically, and historically. But everybody had to decide it for himself or herself. It cannot be forced on anybody. So this is my and our answer to the third reproach. Yes, and now, well, just one moment more. It's interesting. This lady who was a socialist revolutionary, she said, when we parted, she said, you know, strangely enough, that's absolutely improbable and impossible, but in case we won, they will try to lynch the communists. We should help the communists then, because they also have their human rights and must have their human rights. And I must say that something in that direction has been done recently. Well, I will not go into details, but something was done in the tradition of the Lithuanian Helsinki Group. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Professor. The last batch of questions, if you can really keep it brief. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk, Professor. You mentioned the connections between the Helsinki Group and other dissident groups and dissidents in other countries in the region, specifically Russia and Poland. But I was wondering specifically about Czechoslovakia and whether there was a connection to, say, the Charter 77 movement, and in what way that developed in that case. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? No? Okay.
Koks
Then,
buvo klausimas?
apie Helsinkio grupės santykius su Čekoslovakais, su Čekoslovakų grupėm, Lietuvos Helsinkio grupės su Czechoslovakia.
To tell the truth, well, we were very much interested in the developments in Czech Republic and Slovakia, very much interested in Dubček and Havel and such things, but there were virtually no contacts. There were contacts with Poles. For example, even my humble person had some contacts with Adam Michnik. I was allowed, before Helsinki Group was constituted, I was allowed to go to Poland. I met Michnik. I met Michnik, who was just let out of the prison, finished his prison term, and we made friends. And we discussed the Lithuanian and Polish problems. But nothing of the kind happened with Czech Republic or Slovakia, unfortunately. The Poles had some contact with Czechs and Slovaks, so this contact was, it did exist, but it was indirect.
Thank you. And maybe the final question from me. So I don't know if you knew Stalin's daughter, Svetlana Alliluyeva, who also defected to the States maybe a decade before you did. She denounced the Soviet Union and her father. And what she said was that before immigration, she thought that in the free world, people were superhuman, wise, enlightened. And then she said, what a terrible blow is to find out that in the US, there are just the same idiots, incompetent fools, frightened bureaucrats, confused bosses, paranoid fears of deception and surveillance. And this loss of idealism is what happens to defectors only too often. Now, your context was very much different. You were, in top US universities among nice people all the time. But at any point, has it ever crossed your mind that actually the West wasn't what it was cracked up to be?
Well, you see, first of all, please don't compare me to that lady. She was a very unhappy person, because it's the most unhappy fate imaginable is to have such a father. But in many senses, she was okay. But she was crazy. I usually tell that we were deprived of the Soviet citizenship. There were around 40 persons who were stripped of the Soviet citizenship by the special decree of the Supreme Soviet in Moscow. I was the 9th. The first was Trotsky. Nobody remembers it. But the very first person stripped of the Soviet citizenship was Leo Trotsky. The second was she, Svetlana Alliluyeva. Then there was Solzhenitsyn, and a serious man. You can like him or not, but he was a serious man. Then several others, and I was the 9th. So we used to say that's like astronauts. Svetlana Alliluyeva was Laika. Solzhenitsyn was Gagarin. And Tomas Venclova is a sort of, I don't know, Nikolaev or Popovich. There were several such astronauts. Later, after my humble person, there were several more, like famous stage director Lyubimov, a famous cello player Rostropovich, a famous writer Vasily Aksionov. But we say, well, those are marginal because, Rostropovich was 19th and Aksionov was 32nd and Lyubimov was 35th. Well, but the first 10 astronauts is something. Well, I was lucky. I was lucky because I never found out that the Western people are inimical to me or to Soviet dissidents and so on. That very much depends on your character, on your type of personality, I would say. Svetlana Alliluyeva had an unhappy type of personality, better type than her father, but still an unhappy type of personality. So she was, and there were some dissidents. There were Lithuanians, by the way. There were Lithuanians who defected, not were thrown out of the Soviet Union, but simply defected. And many of them were less than happy in the West. Well, first of all, because of the ambitions and because of the expectations. There is a well-known Irish joke you may know, but I will repeat it. That an Irish guy writes a letter to his Molly and in Limerick, or I don't know, in Tipperary, and says, well, dear Molly, as everybody in our village, I was pretty sure that in the United States the streets are paved with gold. Here I've made three discoveries. Discovery number 1, the streets are not paved with gold. Discovery number 2, the streets are unpaved. Discovery number 3, I must pave the streets. So when the person expects streets paved with gold but must pave them himself or herself, he or she becomes unhappy. That also can change. After some time, after some hard work, he or she finds out that the West is not so bad. I was very lucky because I found out that the West was not very bad from the very beginning, and to tell the truth, I never paved the streets. From the very beginning, I taught the students, which is easier. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Why don't we finish with a poetic note then?
Okay.
Would you be able to read us one of your poems?
One. Then I will ask Ellen Kinsey to read the poems in the English version.
Okay.
Could you do it?
He has not had quite enough time to speak, and I think we should read. It's the two poems are in the.
Well, the poems
Okay,
about
so which ones do you want? Which one do you?
The poems are about Ukrainian war. I thought that I was rather prepared to not to discuss my life experiences, but to discuss the present situation in Eastern Europe. But so only the poems will be sort of discussion of that. Should I read it in Lithuanian?
Last night we read the English first, and then.
Yes.
Okay.
It's
Would you like to read in English first, or?
In English, no, my English is not so good.
But do you have them written in English?
No, they were, I never write in English. I write essays, I can write an essay in English, which needs editing, but I never write poetry in any language except Lithuanian.
So do you want me to translate on the fly?
no. It's in the book. It's in the book.
Oh, it's which one? Which page?
I will find
Okay.
it. Mm-hmm.
Azovstal?
Azovstal, maybe, yes. It's a long one. We probably can read it only in English because the Lithuanian, not everybody speaks Lithuanian, it's a long one. But the second one I will read in both languages. Mm-hmm.
I haven't read a poem out loud since high school.
Well,
So.
now Sorry. Now it also needs some comment. At the end, there are two literary references. The first is to a poem by a Russian 19th century poet, Vladimir Pecherin. Vladimir Pecherin was a revolutionary of the 19th century, and then he became a Catholic priest in Dublin, believe it or not, and was buried, and he died and was buried in Dublin. Nobody knows that, but his grave is still there. I talked about that with Seamus Heaney, who was absolutely, who did not know anything about Pecherin. So Pecherin wrote the most anti-patriotic lines in the world literature. In Russian it sounds this way: как сладостно отчизну ненавидеть и жадно ждать ее уничтожения. How sweet is to hate one's fatherland and eagerly wait for its destruction. He speaks about Russia. That's, by the way, is a good answer for people who said that, well, there are no Russians who don't subscribe under the Russian imperialism. Pecherin never subscribed. And I write about a student in Moscow who repeats those lines. There are such students, I'm pretty sure of that. I even know of some of them personally. This is the first reference. The second reference is about Cambronne. Cambronne was a French general who took part in the Waterloo battle. Wellington, as everybody knows, won it, and Napoleon lost. Cambronne was in Napoleon's army. He was proposed surrender. There are two versions what he answered. The first version is very polite. He said, well, French soldiers die, but they never surrender. And the second version, which was probably true, was that he answered in one French word, merde, meaning shit. Well, so I mentioned Cambronne in the end. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Azovstal, hail to you, forgotten goddess of history. With your rocket shell retinue, slaughtered soldiery, we recognize you emerging that day of fear when caterpillar threads and helicopters cross the border. Then we grow accustomed to your rule. At first, a high-rises ruptured chest, trees ablaze on the coast, blasted train junctions, the endless steppes theater, where, mired in black earth, Mazeppa was cursed by Peter. For death is still young. She needs agility, time, to train master her craft. Slowly takes aim, flails for a while. The body greeted by a shrapnel, only after the fifth try, after a dead lull falls. A drone traces an invisible path in the air. The 20-year-old god slowly leads an elder. Behind a fence's shelter, what matter he's a civilian, for both, the last few meters will only lengthen. A peacoat's owner abandons one side of ruin, occupies another. A satellite docked in the heavens impassively looks on. Cannon blast a nitrogen cistern. Then blocks have been taken. Gloria nostra eterna. How distant the harbors and train stations of salvation. Facing the checkpoint, friend or foe, it's unknown. Will they shoot or let you go? Chickens left by gates. For looters, goats loose in yards, turn the gaze. The map with unmarked Trotsyanka, Merefa, Irpin, with their torn-off roofs thrusting up through nettles and caught in the throat, the stench of those no longer, while children learn to say, traitor, rifle, hunger. A bullet, not a seagull, incisors the low tide's line. Beyond a broken window, a mirror reflects clear skies. Descendants born in shelters will observe it with fear, for not God's kingdom, but a sky of nuclear threat is near. Clotted bloodstains, the bass and alto of explosions. For every Thermopylae, there will be an Ephialtes. Bid them farewell, for honor or shame you don't know. The path's cut off. In the end, the Medes will break through. So then, goddess of history, war remains war. In a hostile city, a sunshine-struck boulevard, a student under a linden grinds a cigarette into sand, repeats the old line, how sweet it is to hate one's fatherland. And the soldier, his comrades won't recall his patronym, subsists on stale air in the underground labyrinth. Yet when his words cease, stone and concrete will repeat the defiant riposte Cambronne hurled at his attackers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Now the second one, this one. Well, the second poem is short, and it was well needed also in the original, and it is about the invasion of Crimea that was written in the year 2014. Well, the general atmosphere is like partly ancient, partly medieval, but of course we have in mind our own days. Mm-hmm.
It's called Caligula at the Gates. Our respite was short-lived in the end, but after long hardships, it had seemed it would never draw to a close. Friends invoked poetry and feasted in gardens. Schools upheld the spirit of wisdom. Flute tones sailed under arcades white. Markets rustled in the squares each day, and galleons transported holds of spice. We marveled at color-washed mosaics and were tempted by sun-ripened fruit. We ridiculed the words of the prophets, but agelessly they proved to be true. The room is besieged by clashing steel. The heavens darken, the sea's forces rage. Blow out the candles and close the gates. Beyond them, Caligula and the plague.
And now in the original. Atokvėpis užtruko neilgai, tačiau po tiekos negandų mums rodės, kad jis jau niekad nesibaigs. Draugai dalijos rėmais ir puotavo soduos, mokykloj sklandė išminties dvasia, baltom arkadom plaukė fleitos tonai, kasryt klegėjo mūgės aikštėse ir prieskonius gabeno galeonai. Mus džiugino mozaikų dažai ir gundė saulėje nunokęs vaisius, bet išjuokti bepročiai pranašai kelintą kartą pasirodė teisūs. Nuo plieno kirčių virpa kambarys, juodoja dangus ir nerimsta marios. Užpūsk žvakes ir uždaryk duris, anapus jų Caligula ir maras. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.